Why it sucks to be a gladiator in ancient Rome. You're chained inside a cell beneath the arena, and above your head, 80,000 people are chanting a name. It might be yours. In about 10 minutes, you'll walk out into the sand, and there's a real chance you won't walk back. Most people picture gladiators as either helpless slaves marched to slaughter, or as swaggering action heroes fighting purely for glory. The actual truth sits somewhere far stranger between those two extremes. You could be simultaneously one of the most degraded legal outcasts in Roman society, and one of the most famous, desired, and occasionally wealthy celebrities in the entire empire, sometimes both in the very same week. Today, we're breaking down why being a gladiator in ancient Rome meant living inside one of history's strangest contradictions. Total legal disgrace, paired with a very real shot at fame most free Roman citizens could only dream of. An unwilling slave dragged into the arena. The gladiator population in ancient Rome came from several genuinely different sources, and your legal status shaped almost everything about your experience. A significant portion were enslaved people, purchased specifically for gladiatorial training by wealthy investors who ran gladiator schools as a business. Others were prisoners of war, funneled into the arena as a way for Rome to simultaneously punish and publicly display defeated enemies. Still others were condemned criminals, sentenced to the arena as a form of capital punishment. For these men, survival in the arena wasn't sport, it was execution with a slim, brutal chance of a stay. But here's the detail that surprises most people. A meaningful number of gladiators were free Roman citizens who volunteered for the job. These volunteers, known as octorati, signed a formal contract with a gladiator trainer, legally submitting themselves to corporal punishment, branding, and even death at their master's discretion for the duration of their contract, an almost unthinkable legal surrender of personal freedom by Roman standards. Since Roman citizenship normally carried strong legal protections against exactly this kind of treatment. Why would a free man do this? Debt was the single biggest driver. A citizen drowning in debt could sign a gladiatorial contract, receive a signing payment from the school owner, and use it to pay off creditors, essentially selling a portion of his legal rights and physical safety in exchange for financial survival. Others volunteered chasing fame and fortune directly, drawn by the same appeal that drew people toward dangerous professional sports throughout history. The outsized rewards available to a talented few weighed against genuinely severe risk. Whichever path brought you here, the moment you entered a gladiatorial school, called a ludus, you entered a world with its own brutal internal logic. Regardless of how you became a gladiator, Roman law placed you into a specific, deeply stigmatized legal category known as infamia, the formal loss of legal and social standing shared with actors, prostitutes, and other professions Roman elites considered disgraceful. Practically speaking, infamia stripped you of significant legal rights. You couldn't vote, hold public office, or serve on a jury. Your testimony in court carried less legal weight than that of an ordinary citizen. If you were a free volunteer who entered the arena and later wanted to return to ordinary Roman life, this legal stain didn't automatically disappear, it could follow you for the rest of your life, regardless of how skilled or celebrated you'd become in the arena. Roman moral writers reinforced this stigma constantly in their surviving texts, describing gladiators as the lowest of the low, driven by desperation or base bloodlust, unworthy of the dignity extended to ordinary citizens. This condemnation existed in a genuinely strange tension with reality, because the very same Roman elites writing these moral condemnations were often the ones funding gladiatorial games, attending them obsessively, and in more than a few documented cases, secretly admiring or even envying gladiators' physical prowess and popular fame. Daily life inside a gladiator school reinforced this lowly status constantly. You lived under armed guard. Your training was brutal and highly regimented, often supervised by former gladiators themselves who had survived long enough to become trainers. Discipline was severe. Chains, isolated cells, and corporal punishment for breaking school rules were standard practice, regardless of whether you'd entered as a slave, a criminal, or a free volunteer chasing fortune. Now let's talk about what you were actually training for, because the arena itself was far more strategic and far less chaotic than popular imagination often suggests. Gladiatorial combat was highly specialized. Fighters trained in specific combat styles, each with distinctive weapons, armor, and fighting techniques, and matches were often deliberately arranged to pit contrasting styles against each other for dramatic effect. A heavily armored mirmillo, carrying a large shield and short sword, might face off against a lightly armored retiarius, fighting with only a net, a trident, and speed, the classic pairing designed to create genuine strategic tension between protection and mobility. Contrary to the popular assumption that every match ended in death, most gladiatorial contests did not end with a fatality. Gladiators represented a significant financial investment for their owners. Training a skilled fighter took months or years, and a dead gladiator was a permanent loss of that investment. Fights were typically supervised by referees, and a defeated gladiator who fought well and showed courage could raise a finger in a formal gesture requesting mercy, appealing to the match's sponsor for a decision on whether he would live. That decision is commonly remembered today through the thumbs up, thumbs down gesture, though the exact historical gesture is genuinely debated among historians. Rested with the sponsor of the games. Heavily influenced by the roaring crowd's reaction, a gladiator who fought bravely, even in defeat, stood a real chance of being spared because the crowd, and by extension the sponsor seeking their approval, valued entertainment and courage over simple bloodshed. A gladiator who fought poorly or displayed cowardice faced a much steeper risk. This didn't mean the danger wasn't real. Serious injury was extremely common even in matches that ended without a death sentence, and death rates, while lower than popular imagination suggests, were still genuinely significant across a fighting career. Historians estimate individual gladiators faced meaningfully elevated mortality risk with every single appearance in the arena, compounding dangerously the more fights you survived and the longer your career continued. Here's where the story becomes genuinely strange, because success in the arena could transform your life in ways almost no other profession in the ancient world allowed, regardless of your degraded legal status. Successful gladiators became bona fide celebrities. Their images appeared on graffiti scrawled across Roman city walls. Surviving examples from Pompeii include walls covered in gladiator names, win records, and admiring comments. Essentially ancient fan graffiti, remarkably similar in tone to modern sports fandom. Popular gladiators appeared on souvenir items. Oil lamps, cups, and small figurines bearing their likeness and reputation, sold to enthusiastic fans the way modern sports merchandise carries the names of star athletes. Surviving Roman graffiti and literary sources describe gladiators as objects of genuine romantic and sexual fascination among segments of Roman society, including among some upper-class women. But detail Roman moral writers found scandalous and wrote about disapprovingly, which paradoxically confirms just how real and widespread this fascination actually was. A skilled, photogenic gladiator with a good win record could become one of the most desired figures in an entire Roman city, despite carrying the same legal infamia as the lowest members of society. Financially, successful gladiators could earn substantial prize money for victories, on top of whatever arrangement they'd negotiated with their school owner. A gladiator who survived long enough and won consistently enough could accumulate genuine wealth enough, in some documented cases, to purchase his own freedom outright, or to negotiate significantly improved terms and status within his gladiatorial school. The most celebrated fighters sometimes became instructors themselves, training the next generation from a position of earned respect rather than raw coercion, occupying a genuinely strange social position. Legally disgraced, but practically admired, sometimes even by the same aristocrats whose moral writings condemned the entire profession. For gladiators who survived long enough, there was a formal, celebrated path to freedom. The rudes, a wooden training sword awarded by the game's sponsor, symbolically and legally marking a gladiator's retirement and release from his contractual obligations. Receiving the rudes was a significant public honor, typically awarded to fighters who had demonstrated exceptional skill and survived enough contests to earn genuine crowd adoration. A small number of gladiators who received it went on to live out comfortable, even prosperous lives, some as trainers, some using their accumulated winnings to establish themselves in ordinary Roman commercial life, their legal infamia notwithstanding. But here's the sobering reality behind this success story. The rudes was genuinely rare, precisely because surviving long enough to earn it was genuinely rare. Most gladiatorial careers were short, whether due to death, career-ending injury, or simply being sold or reassigned by an owner seeking better financial returns elsewhere. The famous, wealthy, retired gladiator living comfortably off past glory represents a small, celebrated minority within a much larger population whose careers ended in the sand, in serious injury, or in an early, largely unrecorded death that left no graffiti, no fan following, and no surviving name at all. This is the fundamental gap between the gladiator mythology that survives in Roman graffiti and popular memory, and the statistical reality most gladiators actually experienced. For every name still legible on a Pompeii wall 2,000 years later, there were dozens more whose entire existence left no trace beyond a training school's now lost financial ledger. And yet, despite the very real danger and legal degradation built into the profession, gladiators occupied a genuinely unique cultural position that later Roman writers themselves found worth analyzing seriously. The Stoic philosopher Seneca, writing about gladiatorial combat, expressed genuine admiration for gladiators who faced death with calm composure and discipline, holding them up in his philosophical writing as examples of the kind of courage and self-mastery a Stoic practitioner should aspire to. The remarkable inversion, coming from one of Rome's most respected intellectuals, of the legal infamia gladiators technically carried. Several Roman emperors, including Commodus, were so fascinated by gladiatorial combat that they personally participated in staged, heavily controlled matches themselves, blurring the line between the most powerful man in the empire and the most legally degraded. Gladiator schools also developed genuinely sophisticated medical knowledge as an unintended side effect of keeping their valuable fighters alive and functional. Archaeological analysis of a well-preserved gladiator cemetery in Ephesus revealed skeletal evidence of expert bone setting, wound treatment, and even early forms of what modern researchers recognize as sports medicine and nutrition science techniques developed specifically because keeping expensive, trained fighters alive and combat-ready was directly profitable for school owners, inadvertently advancing Roman medical practice in the process. The gladiator, in other words, occupied a position genuinely unlike almost any other in the ancient world. Officially despised, legally disgraced, and yet simultaneously idolized, desired, occasionally wealthy, and for philosophers like Seneca, held up as a genuine model of courage worth aspiring to. Few other roles in Roman society combined that much contradiction into a single life. Being a gladiator in ancient Rome meant accepting one of the strangest bargains available in the ancient world. Total legal disgrace and genuinely serious physical risk in exchange for a real, if statistically rare, shot at a level of fame, wealth, and public adoration most free Roman citizens never came close to experiencing in their entire lives. For every gladiator whose name survives on a Pompeii wall, remembered as a celebrated champion who fought his way to freedom, there were many more whose entire story ended anonymously in the sand, leaving nothing behind at all. Whether that trade was worth making rarely felt like a real choice for the enslaved and the condemned. There was no choice at all even for the free volunteers. Debt and desperation did most of the deciding long before they ever stepped into the arena. If you enjoyed this video, there are more stories on the channel about what it was like to be someone completely different, in a completely different era. See you in the next one.